Welcome to episode 10 in our series on Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto's The Way of God, and we're in the Providence section of the book, and we are about to start chapter 4, which is entitled Israel and the Nations. And in this chapter we're going to discover a little bit of history of the world and how Israel blossomed from the kind of roots of humanity, and where it stands in history and in humanity, and also how the other nations relate to Israel and its role in this kind of human evolution. So the Ramchal begins. One of the deepest concepts of God's providence involves Israel and the other nations. With regards to their basic human characteristics, the two appear exactly alike. From the Torah's viewpoint, however, the two are completely different and are treated as if they belong to completely different species. We will now delve into this concept, explaining in which way the two are alike, as well as in which way they are different. Before Adam sinned, he was on a much higher level than contemporary man, as discussed earlier. In that state, man was on a very lofty level, fit for a high degree of eternal excellence. If he had not sinned, man would have simply been able to elevate and perfect himself step by step. He would have then given birth to future generations while still in that state of excellence. Their number would be accurately determined by God's wisdom, depending on how those enjoying his good should best be perfected. All these future generations would then have shared this good with Adam. God has also determined and decreed that all these generations that would have been born of Adam should exist on various determined levels. Some generations would thus be primary, while others would be secondary, like roots and branches. Later generations would stem from the earlier ones and share their characteristics, like branches stemming from a tree. The number of trees and branches, however, was determined from the very beginning with the utmost precision. When Adam sinned, he fell from his original high level and brought himself on a great degree of darkness and insensitivity, as discussed earlier. Mankind in general also fell from its original height and remained on a degraded level where it was not at all worthy of the eternal high degree of excellence originally destined for it. Man could thus anticipate only a very much lower level, and it was in this state that children were born into the world. They were therefore all born into this degraded state. Nevertheless, even in the time of his downfall, the elevated aspect that existed in man as a result of his true root was not completely extinguished. Adam was therefore not cast aside completely and could still return to the higher level. But now he would be functioning under an important disadvantage, since he was actually on a lower plane, which merely had the potential aspects of the higher level. God gave Adam's descendants a free choice at that time to strengthen themselves and strive to elevate themselves from this lower state and regain the higher level. The highest wisdom, however, determined the length of time best suited for such an effort, and accordingly set a time limit for these generations. In a way, this is very much like the time limit now given to each individual. Every individual has a limited lifetime, and it is during this period of time that he must attain both perfection and his level in the community of the future world, as discussed earlier. The reason in both of these cases is that everything that involves effort must be limited in time. The highest wisdom deemed it fitting that this effort be divided into a period for the roots and another for the branches. The original effort would thus be that of the roots, while what would come later would involve the branches. The human race initially had a chance to permanently regain its original state and rectify the spiritual damage that had been done. The proper procedure would have been for the roots and heads of Adam's descendants to first elevate themselves to the rectified level. Once this was accomplished, both the roots and their branches would remain in this state forever, since the branches always follow the roots. The time provided for generations to function as roots, however, was limited. During this period, the gate was open and the opportunity existed for any individual to properly prepare himself and permanently become a good and worthy root. He would then be prepared for a high degree of excellence appropriate for man in his original state, rather than that of man in his fallen state. Since this individual would perfect himself as a root, he would attain this for his deserving descendants as well as for himself. They would all receive what he attained, and would therefore be able to remain on the level and state attained by him as their roots. The period during which this was possible extended from the time of Adam until the generation of separation, when the Tower of Babel was built. During this period, there never ceased to be some righteous people who preached the truth to the multitudes, warning them to correct themselves. They included such individuals as Hanoch, Methuselah, Shem, and Ever. Man's measure was filled, however, in the generation of separation. God's attribute of justice then decreed that the time when men could be considered roots should come to a close. Until this time, things could become a permanent part of these roots, depending on what had transpired previously. With the generation of separation, this period came to a close. God then scrutinized all mankind, perceiving the levels that should be made permanent in that generation's members according to their deeds. These things then became a permanent part of their nature in their aspect as roots. It was thus decreed that each should bear future generations, all possessing the qualities that were deemed appropriate for their root ancestor. The descendants of each of these individuals were thus divided into permanent groupings, each with its own characteristics and limitations. They were destined to father future generations who would inherit these characteristics, just as members of any particular species inherit the characteristics of their forebears. According to the highest judgment, it turned out that none of them deserved to rise above the degraded level to which Adam and his children had fallen as a result of their sin. Not a single one had risen above it all. There was, however, one exception, and that was Abraham. He had succeeded in elevating himself, and as a result of his deeds was chosen by God. Abraham was therefore permanently made into a superior, excellent tree, conforming to man's highest level. It was further provided that he would be able to produce branches and father a nation possessing his characteristics. The world was then divided into 70 nations, each with its own particular place in the general scheme. All of them, however, remained on the level of man in his fallen state, while only Israel was in the elevated state. After this, the gate was closed on the era of roots. Things would then be directed and brought upon individuals as branches, each one according to his nature. Even though it may seem that man was originally the same as he is now, there is actually a great difference. Before the generation of separation, man existed in the age of roots and was dealt with accordingly. When this period ended, things were judged and made permanent, and a new age began. This is the age of branches, which still exists. God's great love and goodness decreed that the branches of other nations still be given a chance. If they so desired, they still had the free choice to tear themselves loose from their own roots, and though their own actions include themselves amongst the branches of Abraham's family. This is what God meant when he told Abraham in Genesis 12:3, "All the families of earth will be blessed through you." Abraham was thus made the father of all converts. This, however, would require effort on the part of the individuals concerned. Without such efforts, they would remain attached to their own roots and retain their natural characteristics. It is also necessary to realize that each individual tree is also divided, very much as the descendants of Adam were divided into roots, trees, and branches. Primary branches can thus be distinguished in each individual tree, and these branches are then differentiated to yield their particular members. Abraham's tree consisted of 600,000 main branches. These were the individuals who left Egypt, and it was to them that the Torah was given and the land of Israel divided. Every Jew subsequently born is considered to be an element and descendant of one of these primary branches. It was to these 600,000 original Jews that the Torah was given. When this occurred, the tree was said to have attained maturity. At this time, God also gave the nations their last chance. In His mercy, He had suspended their final judgment until the time that the Torah was given, with the revelation at Sinai. He then offered the Torah to every nation, giving them the opportunity to accept it. If any nation would have then accepted the Torah, it would have elevated itself from its lower states. As it was, none of them desired the Torah, and their judgment was therefore sealed completely. The gate was permanently closed, never again to be opened. It still remained possible, however, for any individual to convert to Judaism. In this manner, he could still include himself in Abraham's tree of his own free will. The decree, however, was not that the other nations should be destroyed. It only meant that they would have to remain on a lower level than we have discussed. The lower state would never have been meant for man if Adam had not sinned. It only came into being in the first place as a result of his sin. These nations still have the human aspect, blemished though it may be, and God desired that they should at least have a counterpart of what was actually appropriate for all of mankind. He therefore granted them a divine soul, or neshama, somewhat like that of the Jew, even though it is on a much lower level. They were likewise given commandments, through which they could attain both material and spiritual advantages appropriate to their nature. These are the 7 universal commandments given to the children of Noah. All this had been arranged from the beginning of creation, prepared for the contingency that man would sin. In this respect, it is like other harmful things and punishments, which were also created conditionally, as our sages teach us. In the world to come, however, there will be no nation other than Israel. The souls of righteous Gentiles will be allowed to exist in the future world, but only as an addition and attachment to Israel. They will therefore be secondary to the Jew, just as a garment is secondary to one who wears it. All that they attain of the ultimate good will have been to attain in this manner, since by virtue of their nature they can receive no more. When the world was divided into 70 nations, God appointed 70 directing angels as officers in charge of these nations, to watch over them and attend all their needs. Thus God does not oversee these nations except in a general manner. It is each one's directing angel who takes care of the details, through the power that God gives it for this purpose. God thus told Israel, and I quote from Amos 3 verse 2, "Only you have I known amongst the families of the earth." This does not mean, however, that the details are withheld from God's knowledge. This cannot be true, since everything in all creation is perceived by God and revealed to Him. What it does mean, however, is that God does not oversee and directly influence their details. This will be further clarified in a later section. God thus made the rectification and elevation of all creation totally dependent on the Jews. To the extent that this can be expressed, we can thus say that He subjugated His providence to them. Through their deeds, they can cause His light to shine forth and have influence, or, on the other hand, hold it back and conceal it. The deed of the other nations, on the other hand, do not add or subtract from the state of creation, nor do they cause God to reveal Himself or withdraw. All they can do is bring about their own gain or loss, and strengthen or weaken their own directing angel. Although God does not involve Himself expressly in the direction of the nations in detail, it is possible that he should exercise his providence over them when it is required for the sake of Israel. This may be because of a single Jew or for a number of them. Such a case, however, falls under the category of means discussed in the previous chapter. So that concludes this chapter 4, chapter on Israel and the nations. And perhaps we should realize that if in this metaphysical tree that we are the kind of the fruits of the tree, or the prized element of the tree, and we are the light to the nations, we have to make sure that we act with the utmost holiness and purity and integrity, as we have this special position. And this special position is not just for pride, this is a responsibility. We have a responsibility towards the other nations as well, to be a beacon of truth and holiness, and truly be a light unto the nations. So in the next episode we deal with chapter 5, and this will deal with the how providence actually works.